Hello, and welcome to another edition of BNEWS In Depth. I'm your host, Rich Hosford. This week we have an important topic that many don't often think about, municipal cybersecurity. Everyone knows that businesses have long been targeted by hackers, but in more recent years, cities and towns have been increasingly subject to ransomware and other scam attacks. To see how Burlington is preparing for the possibility of a cyber intrusion, we will discuss the town's new cybersecurity policy. We'll start with a conversation with Select Board member Nick Priest, the board's liaison to the Information System Security Advisory Committee, also known as ISSAC, about the need for action. We'll then talk to ISSAC Chair Steve Morin and Vice Chair David Hughes to drill down into the details of the new policy. We have a lot to get to, so let's get started.
I'm now joined by Selectman Nick Priest, who is the liaison from the Select Board, to the ISSAC. Nick, thanks for taking some time in this busy week that you've been having.
Absolutely, I'm happy to.
And coming in and joining us. First of all, just talk about what your role on the committee is as the representative from the Board of Selectmen.
Like a lot of committees, we try to have a select board liaison member, somebody who can attend some, if not all, of the committee's meetings, have a good understanding of what's going on, and be able to report back to the select board at large, on periodic updates, and that's what our subcommittee report time is for. And then, when the time comes for larger things, policies and whatnot to be brought to the select board, act as, an additional voice, on the matter, either in favor or against it, depending on what the committee is going for and what you feel is happening at the time. So that's my general role, and I just try and support the ISSAC like I do all the committees that I liaise with.
Mm-hmm. And just talk about a little bit, the background of the committee. I know it used to be Information Systems Advisory Committee. Now it's Information Systems Security Advisory Committee. So we added the extra S.
That's right. Yep. It's still ISSAC, but now with an extra S.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a great marketing. But so I believe back in 2014, I want to say, is when the first ISSAC 1S existed as an ad hoc committee through town meeting, if I recall correctly. And it was their original task to just do a general evaluation of all the information systems that we had here in town as a municipality, to make sure that we had everything that we needed to have. So let me just back up for a second and just say that I think that from 2014 on, we really started to evaluate information systems as a piece of the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Right, much like you'd evaluate the roadways or anything else, right? Is that this is now a piece of how we function in society, and now it's time to make sure that everything is as effective and as efficient as possible. And so, 2014, big study was done with a massive amount of recommendations. Some were initially achieved that were either low cost or low impact, that were easy enough to get done with minimal red tape or extra financing. That committee, because it was ad hoc, was dissolved. Mm-hmm. And then in 2019, town meeting members said, we think it's probably time to bring this back, given the rampant, almost shift toward municipalities being attacked, from cybersecurity, threat standpoint. So, I worked with some folks, and we felt like it was important to make this a standing committee, because again, if you view it like a piece of infrastructure, you want to have that to be a standing committee, to always kind of be advisory, just like Ways and Means is from a finance perspective, right?
Right.
And so we worked to make that happen, and then once that happened, the first big step was outlining and implementing a cybersecurity policy. And so for the last couple of years, that's what we've been doing. And then the select board voted on that. Time means nothing anymore, so I'm going to assume it was last year. At some point, we voted on that. Actually, no, it wasn't last year. It was 2021. It was maybe back in the summer.
I think so. I was
Sure.
going to say, I don't think it was quite that long ago.
Yeah,
Let's say spring.
6 months ago. We'll ballpark it.
Yeah, sounds
fix
good.
that in post. So we presented, meaning ISSAC and myself presented, and obviously I supported this new policy, 7 pages long, very, very detailed, very, very thorough. It covers off on all of the, in my opinion, all the things that we need to be looking at as a municipality to manage cybersecurity threats. And the select board passed that because, again, like I said, we see the value and the importance of securing, ourself from a information systems and digital perspective.
Right. I think you kind of touched upon this, but we really have seen a change recently in the tactics of hackers and scammers, and they are focusing more on cities and towns rather than necessarily just big businesses, because I think they realize there's money to be had there too. When you look out and see the threat, like, does it really? I guess what's your sense of how important addressing this is right now?
Sure. So importance, absolutely high importance. When you look at what's been happening, right? For a long time, the attack focus was almost based on the notion of malware and viruses, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to infiltrate your system. We're going to, create or lock you out, and we're going to have, we're going to hold your information at ransom, right?
Right.
And while that's still a tactic for sure, the larger bucket that is becoming more and more prevalent is this notion of scamming, right, or phishing. And by that I mean, no matter what, human error is one of the biggest openings for people trying to infiltrate a system. And so what will happen is there will be people who are phishing for information, looking to scam and get somebody within the organization to send them information and or actual bank accounts, money wire transfers,
right.
Whatever, so that they can just snatch and grab, right? And that can be very dangerous because they're posing as somebody else within the company, right? So if you and I work together and suddenly you get an email from me,
right?
It's like, hey, Rich, need this right away, right? The hope is that we educate, the employees to a point where they're paying attention to these things, so that when they see it, they go, something about this is strange. Let me double check.
Right.
Right, and they don't fall prey to it.
Yes. Yeah, I don't remember what town it was. I think it was in New Hampshire though, and these scammers were able to mimic was a normal invoice that the town would pay, and they were able to get the money routed to them, and it just disappeared into the ether.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's what happens. And I think that they're targeting municipalities because you have, especially suburban towns. When you think about the greater Boston area, right? We're growing at a rapid rate.
Right.
We saw year over year our operating budget increase by over $10 million, right? And so when you think about trying to attack larger companies, right? Even medium-sized companies, these are companies that have long-term infrastructure. They typically have larger teams of IT, whether it be in-house or contract. They have people looking for these things, and they do lots of training for their employees, right? Municipalities, depending on their size, might not be doing a lot of these things, right? And so that's why the cybersecurity policy was put into place, to focus on how to be proactive and preventative, right? So education, understanding, awareness, right? And then there's also the whole piece of, well, if we do get attacked, here is the plan that we're going to follow so that we can avoid being basically held at ransom.
And so I know training is a big part of it. What else from the policy do you think is important for people watching to sort of know that what's in there?
So training is a big piece, and I think that when we talk about the other side, the when we get attacked, I think that's important to say, is that it's not an if, right? This isn't the percentage of the likelihood of us being attacked grows every day, right? And thankfully, through the education and training that we do with the staff, things have already been caught and stopped and flagged, and we're like, in terms of preventative measures, we're there, right? I think it's important for folks to know that in terms of a plan in place for when we're attacked, should someone get through, the policy put into place a very strong plan and group of people to ensure that there are steps to take.
Right.
When that happens, right? So it's not like, we're only focusing on education and awareness and, oops, they got through, they got our information, we got to pay, right? It's, no, we got through, okay. Time to, spin up the task group, time to notify, all, necessary authorities, and time to crack down this as fast as possible to stop it, right? Because at the end of the day, we don't want to be paying anything,
right.
So yeah, I think that's important too. This isn't just about, education and awareness.
Right, exactly. The question just popped right out of my head, so we'll go to a different one. You had talked, I think one of the things that was sort of stressed during that meeting where the presentation was made, that, the policy is, in place now, but it's not over. Like these things change all the time.
Right.
So just talk about the need for, just continue staying at it.
Yeah. So great question. Staying vigilant is the name of the game, right? So a lot of policies you can kind of enact and then, they can either lay dormant or the change goes into effect and everything's, moving in that direction, right? Cybersecurity is always a moving target, right? So what's great about our ISSAC is that, we have folks on there who, I should also back up and say that we have staff on there, right? So we've got our own IT folks as a part of this committee. We've got, police and schools, and, we've got people involved from a staff perspective to ensure that we're all having this conversation. But the policy also goes that one step further of taking action, by which I mean, there's a task group, and right now that task group is made up of all the directors. And so when our town administrator holds the director meetings, we have IT there and we have ISSAC there, and we make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of recent information, in terms of training, in terms of what the departments and divisions are doing with their staff. Really just to make sure that we're covering off on things and we're all staying informed. And that way, everyone is being more mindful of, what's going on, as opposed to, just keep an eye out for those emails, right? Because again, like I said, human error is one of the biggest ways that they're going to get us, right? That one time that we make that one little mistake by thinking, that it's the person that it's not. And, that door is open.
Yeah, and like you said, like we were saying, it keeps changing and, moving along. They keep coming up with new ways to try to exploit the system. So
without question, yeah.
Just a couple last things. A lot of work went into this. So your comment on just the ISSAC. I don't want to say ISSAC committee because that's redundant, but on ISSAC and just all the effort that they put into trying to get us to where we are today.
Yeah, it was an immense amount of effort. I mean, when you say, oh, it's a 7-page policy, right? That almost diminishes the importance of what those 7 pages contain and how much work went into it. They worked on it for over a year. They did a massive amount of research. They made sure that all the necessary stakeholders were involved, right? So it wasn't just them creating a policy, me looking at it, and then going to select board. We talked with HR, we talked with the unions, we talked with everybody involved to ensure that we were out of the gate ready to go. Because what we didn't want to do was put something forward that was then going to have to take 2 steps back because we didn't talk to somebody, right? Or we didn't make sure we were all signed off on X, Y, and Z. So tons of research, tons of effort, many, many drafts, right, to get it into a good place. Obviously, town council looked at it, to make sure that it was up to snuff and that we were spot on with the language. So I mean, just in terms of a committee really, coming out of the gate, nose to the grindstone, getting the work done, I commend them for their efforts because, like I said, when you look into, when you look at now, when you look into the future, and you think about cybersecurity and cyber preparedness as a piece of the infrastructure, this is now that foundational block that we can grow and build from.
And last thing, again, looking to the future, just as, things progress, what do you see as the role of like the Board of Selectmen and the town administration to, be just, supporting the committee and just sort of staying focused on this topic?
Yeah, I think that it's, again, because it's a ever evolving, ever changing thing. I think that it's our job as a select board to ensure that ISSAC is staying up on everything, and that we're as informed as we can possibly be. I think that as we grow and evolve, the task force, I think that the select board and the administration's office plays a larger role in making sure that everyone is performing their tasks, that we are all up on our trainings and our information and our preparedness, and then there even comes a certain point where is it necessary once a year for us to run a drill? Should we be attacked, right? Obviously, Board of Health has their flu clinic, which is essentially, a certain level of training, right?
Right. Yeah,
we run emergency preparedness trainings for disasters, right? So to have something that we do, on that type of a basis where we engage the task force out of the gate and say, okay, this is a drill. However, we need to see how we're functioning as a group to ensure that should it happen to us, we are actually ready. So that may be a next step down the road. I'd like to get through this current pandemic before we start asking too much of the team. Obviously, they're all stretched thin and focused on making sure we're doing what we can for that. But I think that's probably a next step for sure. I think the current phase of things of ISSAC and IT and the department directors all working in concert, with town administrator at the helm, is where we want to be right now, and for at least the initial foreseeable future.
Excellent. Well, I think that was a pretty well-rounded discussion, and I really thank you for taking some time and coming in and sharing, your views and your thoughts about, this important topic.
Happy to. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, hopefully we don't have to come back and talk about, more serious, after effects of an attack or anything like that in the future. So.
Yeah, that would be. Let me tell you, the notion of being attacked and the ramifications if someone who is smart enough or determined enough, comes after us, just raises so many red flags in my mind in terms of, how we react and how we handle that. I think that we have a great plan in place.
Yep.
But I think that practice and reality are two different things. So it's great to be prepared, but like I said, I think having drills will be a good next step too, so that we have muscle memory, let's say.
Yeah, exactly.
Against it, because we're still a growing community. We're a large suburban town north of Boston. We're a target. And I think it's important that we recognize the opportunity that one might see in trying to hold our municipality hostage, or trying to subvert, our staff through scamming means. And if we're watchful, we should be able to stay in front of it.
Excellent. All right. Well, now we really will wrap up. So once again, thank you for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
We go now to my conversation with ISSAC leaders Steve Morin and David Hughes for the in-depth details of the town's new cybersecurity policy. Let's check it out. I am now joined by Steve Morin and David Hughes of the ISSAC committee. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you let's start a little bit just talking about the background of the committee, why it was formed, how it was formed, sort of the iterations over time.
Sure. So back in 2012, 2013, there was an ISSAC committee with one S, an Information Systems Advisory Committee, which was formed of a bunch of IT folks from the town administration and also some town residents who had a lot of knowledge in IT. And they started helping the town with some of the IT functions and providing information about different aspects of technology and helping them form some recommendations. And they produced this gigantic report which the town implemented over a few years. And it included recommendations to processes and procedures and also new equipment and things like that. But then the committee went idle for a while, and it got picked up in 2019 when, with the advent of a lot of different types of cyber attacks that had been in the news. And so we were formed as an ad hoc committee in 2019. And during that time, we decided that we really need to have this kind of a committee on an ongoing basis because of the evolution of cyber attacks and how they evolve over time. And so I ended up writing a draft for a bylaw, which then got reviewed by the whole committee. We voted on it, and then we put it as a warrant to the town article, and town meeting agreed that we really needed a committee to look at this process. So then the standing committee was appointed by the town selectmen last year. We have the purview, now we're the ISSAC, the Information Systems Security Advisory Committee.
Right, added that second S.
We added the second S. But we do have in our purview the ability to just look at information systems in general, but our primary focus is on security.
Okay. So the charter of the committee is to advise the select board and the town's leadership in general about measures that should be taken to ensure the security, the integrity, and the continuous operation of the town's computing systems, and thereby to help ensure the continuous operation of critical services for the town's citizens and the business community.
And what kind of experience and backgrounds do your members bring to the table here?
Well, the committee is composed of 9 official representatives, 4 from town functions and 5 from citizens of the town. There are several ex officio members. In general, the citizen members have really pertinent background in cybersecurity, in one aspect of cybersecurity or another.
Yeah.
Steve, for example, is quite an expert in terms of mobile security in particular, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. And we also have folks who are familiar with network security and other aspects of information technology overall.
Yeah, you'd have to think that with Burlington and all the kind of tech companies that we have, you'd have a good pool of candidates to be able to draw from.
Yeah, no, we're actually very lucky in terms of the number of high-tech companies that are around here and the number of employees that make Burlington home. The original person who was the chair of ISSAC for a long time and who was part of the standing committee last year moved out of town, but he brought a wealth of information, and that was his day job. That he did that for a local company.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So let's kind of talk about why the committee is here or was put together. Like you mentioned, cyber attacks on municipalities. How have they sort of changed over time?
They've changed tremendously over time. The targets for which the criminals have targeted have evolved over time. Originally, they were interested in breaking into companies and getting information. But then they started to see how they could monetize that operation. And so they started to look at doing encryption. So what they would do is they would break into your network, and then they would encrypt the files on your disk. And if you were to go and boot your computer and try to access them, they would ask you for some kind of amount of money in order to get the decryption key in order to decrypt those files. And there are lots of criminal organizations who are like software developers who go into work every day and it's their main job to look for exploits in operating systems and look at additional ways of extracting information and causing trouble.
You know, there's a real industry around. There's a real hacker industry. There are people who focus on acquiring data, personal information, for example, and then selling that. There are people who build tools that can be used for this purpose. There are people who maintain very large networks of computers which can be used to launch attacks. There are help desks. I mean, cybercrime it may be the only criminal industry that has a help desk. and even more recently, there's now an element of venture capital where the bad guys will put up money with other bad guys in return for a cut of the proceeds.
Okay.
So it's a very challenging environment because the bad guys are every bit as smart as the good guys, and there's constantly a punch counterpunch sort of relationship.
And now I think what you had kind of mentioned with the encryption, is that what people are seeing on the news a lot, is like the
ransomware attacks?
Thank you, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. We've just seen, especially since probably the beginning of the summer of last year, just a ramp up in the number of ransomware attacks, and they've gotten actually they've gotten a lot more emboldened over time. Back in the spring, we had a case where, during the May timeframe, where an oil pipeline ended up getting shut down because hackers got in and encrypted the files. And out of pure safety, they decided to shut down the pipeline. But then, without the oil flowing up the East Coast, you heard pockets and pockets of gas stations starting to run out of gas, and causing a bit of chaos because people started hoarding gasoline. But it's more pervasive than that, because you see the ransomware attacks at hospitals that are trying to provide services to patients and not being able to provide those services. So there's real lives that could be in jeopardy.
Yeah, I was going to say, it has real world impact.
It definitely has.
It's not just someone's computer not working.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
We're so dependent on how computers work that when these ransomware attacks happen, we just lose the services that are being provided by those companies. And in some cases, they're really mission critical companies.
And
I was just going to add, there are generally three potential dimensions to these attacks. One is the disruption of everyday services that people rely upon. The second is public safety concerns, and Steve touched on a couple of those. There was also the case of a water treatment plant in Florida that was attacked, and the attackers were able to increase the levels of sodium hydroxide lye to 100 times the legal limit. Unfortunately, that was caught before the water was contaminated, but that is a good example of the kinds of things that can now be done. And then finally, there can be tremendous financial consequences, where the payouts for ransomware have increased dramatically to where 6- and 7-figure ransoms are not unheard of.
yeah, I think it was Peterborough, New Hampshire. Recently, they had, not so much that type. It was more of like the traditional email phishing scam. They sent, some company sent a bill that, it was for a bill they were supposed to be paying, but it was not the same company, not the same, routing address. So, there's a lot of things to look out for. And I imagine it's going to be very difficult to fight it on, like, going after the hackers, because, they could be anywhere. I gather some of them, are international.
Yeah, there's a variety of different approaches that we can take to helping avoid that kind of situation, and unfortunately, it can't be 100%. But one of the things that we try to do is alert people that, like, when you get an email with an attachment, you have to really take a look at who's sending it and whether you're expecting something like that or not. For example, just the other day, I got an email that didn't go through my into a junk folder, but was directed at me that just there was no subject, had an unfamiliar email address, and all that was attached to it was a PDF. And it looked like it was something that I should probably look at, but I wrote back to the author that saying, like, I don't have any context on this address. I don't have, there's no title or subject or any other information, so I'm not going to open this PDF. And unless they provided some additional information, it's just sitting there in the inbox.
Right.
But I know my company, for example, will periodically send us phishing attacks to try and see whether we're paying attention to it. And we have something called Report It Now. So like if you think an email is suspicious, you can actually report it. And the security folks at my company will take a look at it and investigate it further if required. But there's a lot of education. People should really be looking at the email address it's coming from. Like if you get an email from your bank saying, your account is frozen, for example, most of the time if you look at the sender, it's, coming from a Gmail address or a Yahoo address or something like that. And, people will just look at it, click on it, and provide the personal information that they're looking for, and then
Right.
that's how they get caught.
No, go ahead.
The other way that it can happen is they'll send an attachment, and in the attachment there'll be some malicious code, whether it's incorporated in a PDF, incorporated in like an Excel or Word document or some other type of attachment. Hackers are always looking for vulnerabilities in these types of packages, and when there's an exploit that they know about that hasn't been patched yet, they'll start to flood with a lot of emails with those types of attachments.
Mm-hmm. A lot of different things to look out for.
Yeah. People are viewed as both the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain, as well as the first line of defense. So when Steve talks about security awareness training and building a cyber-aware culture, this is very, very important. But it's important not just in the corporate, kind of an environment or the municipal environment. It's really important for all of us in our personal lives, particularly now with more and more people working from home, using their own devices at home. There are things that they can do inadvertently at home that put themselves at risk, and we don't want that to happen. But that risk can then also be transferred into the workplace. And clearly we want to help to prevent that as well.
No, that's a good point. A lot of people are working with their devices at home.
Yeah.
So I know you had the cybersecurity policy that was presented to the Board of Selectmen. Kind of what was the process of putting that together?
I'll let Dave talk about that.
All right. Well, after significant discussion, amongst the members of the committee, a draft policy was put together. Everyone had an opportunity to provide feedback, to improve it, to enrich it, and eventually the committee, agreed to go forward with a proposal to the board. One of the points made in the policy, though, and one of the points that we tried to make to the select board was that this policy really has to be a living document.
Right.
The nature of threats will change. The best practices to prevent and mitigate an attack will change. We were all very conscious that the policy isn't perfect, that it will have to be changed as implementation proceeds. So that was the process, and I would say that the town's IT leadership is doing a really good job from an implementation point of view.
I would add to that we also did a lot of research in terms of what was available both at the federal and at the state level. And we reached out to our local representatives to get in contact with the folks in the Massachusetts government to get additional information and resources and learn what's available. And the IT staff had also been doing the same thing and getting some information as well. So that really formed the basis of some of the things that we took into our cybersecurity policy.
Right. No need to reinvent the wheel, as they say.
Right.
Right.
Now, I know, read through the policy. You talk about the 3 phases that you're trying to address. Can you talk about them and just sort of what kind of thinking goes into each phase? Sure.
So the first phase is the prevention phase. What are the things that we can do to prevent cyber attacks from being successful? And the idea behind that is we can do a lot of soft skill training in terms of the things like the phishing attacks that we see, or getting people aware that everybody has a role to play in terms of cybersecurity policy, and that there are things that we can do ahead of time, like we can identify at a department level, like what kind of data they're processing, where is it kept, how is it handled, who has access to it, and how they back it up and how they make sure that that data stays safe. The second phase is, in the event that we do get attacked, we have to assume at some point that there's a possibility that we could be attacked. And so how do we handle that? Like, what is the process for recovering? So we take that information we generated in the preparation phase, and we're able to be able to recover from that cyber attack. Mm-hmm. And then the third phase is basically recovering from that attack and taking the lessons that we learned from that attack and applying it going forward. Do you want to add?
No, I think you covered it well.
Okay.
There are best practices and a lot of materials available to help guide work done in each of these 3 phases.
And what are some of the recommendations for the town employees that you put forward?
Well, the policy includes suggested best practices for employees, as well as best practices that should be implemented at the departmental level. A lot of the best practices, specifically with respect to employees, have to do with the sort of cyber awareness that we talked about before, creating a culture of cybersecurity. And that's a matter of regular teaching, typically in small doses, but to get everyone in the habit of being vigilant with respect to engaging with email in particular, as email continues to be the #1 threat vector. It's not the only one, but right. it's the #1 threat vector. And so while we advised with respect to best practices, our role really is advisory, and so then there is the implementation stage, and that's what the town's IT leadership and more broadly the task force is working on.
Yeah, that's going to be my next thing. You talk about a task force with quite a few roles and responsibilities. Like, who's going to be the task force? Like, how does that work?
So essentially, the way that we envisioned it, at least proposed to envision it, is that the town administrator is the leader of that task force, and the members of each of the department heads. The department heads of each department would form the members of that committee and work together to implement this cybersecurity policy. We left some flexibility in that there may be some departments that are relatively smaller that could be covered by other department heads, but we wanted to at least propose some type of framework that the town could work with. And for the most part, the department heads are actively involved and engaged in the process.
Well, I can tell that quite a lot of work went into forming this. Just any comment just about your team, how everybody kind of contributed?
I think everyone on the committee, even the ad hoc officio members who attend the meetings, have played a strong role in terms of contributions. I would like to call out that there were 3 members of the subcommittee who just took, with David's leadership, took it by the horns and wrote the initial draft policy back in the February-March timeframe. which we really used as the framework to produce what we proposed to the selectmen, or the Board of Selectmen, or sorry, the Select Board back
Yes,
in
the
Select
Select Board
Board back in June.
Darn, trust me, I've been writing it wrong for the last month.
Exactly, but those three members, did the yeoman's work in terms of getting the framework in place, and we provided constant feedback in our meetings. And when we were getting closer, we increased the cadence of our meetings to finally come up with, a real solid draft policy that we thought that we're ready and was ready for feedback. And that once the committee blessed it, we got some feedback from the town administrator, from the council, and from human resources, and their feedback was great. And then we decided it was time. I think we had a little bit of nervousness in presenting it because we thought there would be some pushback, but what really came to fruition is someone in the committee mentioned, well, this is a living document. We need to get it out there, start the process, start the implementation. We can learn from it. We can adapt the document as we need to go forward. What David said is really, it's a living document, and we really believe that. And we'll learn things as we go along and improve it.
Yeah, it's a never-ending struggle.
Right. That's quite true.
Mm. Do you have anything to?
Well, I was just going to add that everyone on the committee was really motivated to help protect Burlington, and the people on the town side who are involved in implementation are very professional, very capable, and it's something that we all need to keep our eyes on continually. But everyone's heart's in the right place and with the right skills.
Excellent. Well, thank you for all the hard work, and thank you for coming on the show and talking about it.
You're most welcome. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. So, till next time.
Thanks.
Thanks. So there you have it, the rise of cybersecurity threats to municipalities and Burlington's actions to combat them. I'd like to thank my guests, Nick Priest, Steve Morin, and David Hughes, for joining me. I'd also like to thank all of you for watching. We'll be back next month with another edition of BNEWS In Depth, so stay tuned.